in the chat box. Perfect. Perfect. Okay, I'm sharing my screen. Let me know once you can see my screen. I'm sharing my screen. Let me know once you can see my screen. Is it visible? Is it visible? Yeah, perfect. Guys, so far in the REST API, RESTful services, we learned how to develop REST API using Spring Boot, and how to develop REST client by using Spring Boot. In the last session we discussed how to send HTTP post request with the headers using web client. In the last session we discussed how to send HTTP post request with headers using web client, and we understood how conversions will happen. We discussed about conversions at client side and resource side. We discussed about conversions at client side and resource side. Here we will be having a resource application. And we will be having a client application. Client application will communicate with the resource. Resource application will process the request and will send a response to the client. Good. Now, client is going to make a request. To resource, and resource is going to send the response to client. Client is going to make a request to the resource. Resource is going to send a request to the client. So this is request and response. What they are using as a mediator? They are using HTTP protocol. As a mediator between client application and resource application. They are using HTTP protocol as the mediator between client application and resource application. Okay. Now, client side, our Java object will be converted to JSON data before sending the request. Client side, Java object will be converted to JSON data before sending the request. Java object will be converted to JSON data will be sent to the request. Resource side, JSON data will be converted to Java object. Resource side, JSON data will be converted to Java object. Now, when it is sending the response, the Java object will be converted to JSON will be sent as a response. Now here, JSON data will be converted back to Java object at the client side. So this is how the client application and resource applications are going to execute. This is how the client application and resource applications are going to execute. Are you able to follow this? Are you guys able to follow this? This is what we have discussed in the last session. How to send a post request with headers using web client, and we discussed about conversions at client side and resource side. Okay. Now, guys, in the real time, how the logic will be implemented, that also we have discussed. How the logic will be implemented at the real time. Here, UI application will be available. Front end will be available for our application. This front-end application will be talking to client application. Front-end application will be talking to client application. Client application contains the business logic to access the resource. Now, end user is going to talk to our front-end application. End user is going to talk to our front-end application. End user will be talking to our front-end application. Are you guys clear with my point? Here, end user. Here, end user will be available. End user will be talking to UI project. UI project will be talking to client project. Client project is backend project. In the backend project, we will be having the client logic. That client logic will be talking to resource API, sending a request and getting the response. Like this, we are going to develop our application. Now, there is one question. Guys, can one web application act as a web service also? Can one web application act as a web service also? Right? Now, if you take the example of IRCTC, IRCTC having C2B communications, having B2B communications. Now, IRCTC app is available. IRCTC application is having UI also. User interface is available for IRCTC. People can talk to IRCTC application directly and they can book the tickets by using IRCTC. Like this here, end users are available for interacting with IRCTC. For end users, UI is available in the IRCTC. Here we have the UI. End user will communicate with this UI of IRCTC and they can book the tickets, they can cancel the tickets, and whatever they want, they can do that. Similarly, this IRCTC application is having one API also. That means here, Make My Trip is one application. Go Ibibo or Yatra is another application. Go Ibibo. Some name is there. That application is also available in the market. Those people are communicating with IRCTC applications. To perform operations. Those people are communicating with the IRCTC application to perform the operations. Are you guys able to understand this? What IRCTC is doing? Now? Make My Trip is communicating with IRCTC. Yatra communicating with the IRCTC. Go Ibibo is also communicating with IRCTC. Now here, end user is available. Who is interacting with IRCTC application. Now this is C2B communication. With IRCTC, it is C2B communication. IRCTC doing a business, customer is communicating with the business by using UI. But here, IRCTC doing B2B also. Communication also. Make My Trip is one business application. Yatra is one business application. Go Ibibo is one business application. They all are communicating with the IRCTC to book the tickets. End users also can communicate with the IRCTC directly to book the tickets. Are you clear with my point? In one web application, we can have a web service also. Now tell me here, who is providing a web service? Who is providing a web service? IRCTC is providing a web service. Who is accessing that web service? Make My Trip, Yatra, Go Ibibo are accessing the web service given by IRCTC. So these are called as client applications. Okay, one application can provide both B2B communications and C2B communications. One web application can provide both C2B service and B2B service also. Guys, when you are going to develop any applications in the real time, you have to understand that fact that one application can support for C2B service and B2B service also. C2B nothing but customer to business service and B2B nothing but business to business. C2B means customer to business communication. Customer to business communication. B2B means business to business communication. B2B means business to business communication. C2B nothing but customer to business communication. B2B nothing but business to business communication. Do you understand this scenario? Do you understand this scenario? How web applications will be developed in the real time? IRCTC is having its own UI. IRCTC is having its own UI. So it is doing C2B communication. And IRCTC is providing the services to other applications. That is nothing but IRCTC is providing the B2B services also. IRCTC is providing the B2B services also. Are you guys comfortable with this? Are you guys comfortable with this? Now, I have another requirement. Can one application act as a resource and client? Can one application provide the services and consume the services? Can one application provide the services and consume the services? Yes or no? Can one application provide the services and consume the services? Can one application provide the services and consume the services? Is it possible? One application can play both roles? Can one application play the both roles? Yes. Now, let me take a scenario. Now, here I am having app. Now, this app is talking to one app called IBM app. This app is talking to another app called IBM app. IBM developed one web app, IBM application, which is a weather forecasting application. IBM developed one application which is called as a weather forecasting application. Now, my application will send zip code. My application will send zip code as the input to the IBM application. IBM application will send temperature for that zip code. In that area, what is the current temperature? That weather forecasting information, weather information or temperature information, whatever it is, weather report. Weather report we are going to get as a response from IBM application. Weather report we are getting from IBM application. Are you clear with this? Now, who is the resource and who is the client? Who is the resource and who is the client now? Can anyone tell me who is the resource and who is the client now? Who is resource and who is client? IBM application is acting as a resource and my application is acting as a client. My application is acting as a client. So this is called as app 1. This is called as app 1. This is called as app 1. App is acting as a client. IBM app is acting as a resource. Okay, fine. Now, next one, here I am having one more application which is called as app 2. I am having one more application which is called as app 2. This application is interacting with the app 1 by giving city name. It is giving the city name. It is giving the city name or postal code, whatever it is, city. It is giving as a input. It is giving as a input. Now, this app 1 is returning temperature. This app 1 is returning temperature. Okay. Now, app 1 is connecting with the database to get the zip code based on the city name. App code is connecting with the database to get the zip code based on city name. Based on the city name. Are you guys getting my point? In the real time, applications will be developed like this. City is the input. For the database, we will give it and we will get the zip code as a output. Now tell me, who is acting as a client and who is acting as a resource? Now tell me, who is acting as a client and who is acting as a resource? Who is acting as a client and who is acting as a resource? Come on guys. Come on. Tell me, who is acting as a client and who is acting as a resource? Who is acting as a resource and who is acting as a client? Now, can I say app 1 is playing both roles? Can I say app 1 is playing both roles? App 2 is acting as a client for app 1. Now here, app 2 is acting as client for app 1. App 2 is acting as a client for app 1. Right? App 1 acting as resource for app 2 and acting as client for IBM app. Acting as a client for IBM app. IBM app acting as resource for app 1. IBM app acting as resource for app 1. You understand my point? You understand my point here? In the real time, we will be developing our applications like this, guys. So don't think that only one application will act as only resource or only client. Don't come to conclusion, sir, one application will provide only service. One application will consume only service, will only consume service. One application will play only resource role. One application will provide only client role. That's not true. In the real time, we will have a requirement like this also. In the real time, we will have a requirement like this also. You got my point now? Whenever you develop one REST API, somebody may access your REST API and you will access somebody's REST API.